If you look into the history of philosophy, you will notice that philosophers have had very different opinions about the possibility of knowledge and how knowledge can be attained. From our perspective, some of these ideas may seem strange because we are accustomed to thinking about knowledge in a certain way. But that way of thinking has a history. It is not at all how people have always thought. Plato has been hugely influential to all of philosophy since his time, but his thinking about knowledge may seem very strange to the modern person. He did not value observations much, because he was aware that sometimes our senses fool us. Instead, he trusted reason. True knowledge would have to be eternal, unchanging, permanent. Because things in the world of our senses are not like that, true knowledge can only be about things that we cannot observe using our senses. Plato believed that true knowledge can be achieved by thinking alone. In fact, what people thought they knew about reality based on their observations and experiences, according to Plato, was just doxa. So all beliefs about objects and such were just illusory knowledge. True knowledge, episteme, could only be about ideas. They are immaterial, perfect, and eternal. Knowledge about them could be attained by reasoning alone, as they can never be observed with our senses. This led Plato to a specific metaphysical view, which I will return to later. Clearly, epistemology cannot really be divorced from metaphysics. They inform each other. But for now, and for epistemology, it is important only to understand that Plato believed in the power of reasoning to uncover the truth. This is called rationalism. Plato thought that we have innate knowledge about some things, which he thought was the result of our rational minds having, before our births in this life, existed in some realm of ideas. That is how we can understand abstract things, because we are not only rational minds but also corporeal beings. The rational mind, being forced into this combination at birth, has forgotten at least most of what it knows about the ideas. With practice, it can recall those things, a phenomenon Plato called anamnesis, undoing amnesia. But it does seem a bit odd that if all knowledge is knowledge of ideas, so that even the knowledge of horses is based on knowing the idea of horse, there seem to have been new discoveries over time. How come Plato or his contemporaries did not reach the idea of electromagnetism or of television or even of the vacuum of space? Also, it is a bit arrogant and typical of philosophers to praise their ability to reason and to uncover the truth about things simply by thinking. Humans are very good at deceiving themselves by thinking, and in fact our cognitive abilities are severely limited, as any psychologist or cognitive scientist can tell. Rationalism is not too popular anymore, for a good reason. Pun intended. It may seem to you much more commonsensical to trust what your senses are telling you, at least usually. And that is also what John Locke thought. He did not accept the existence of innate ideas. Instead, he believed that everyone is born as tabula rasa, a blank canvas or blank slate, on which their experiences or impressions paint the picture of reality. Everything we know is thus based on experiences or empirical observations. This view is thus called Empiricism. The rise of empiricism coincided with the so-called scientific revolution, the rise of modern empirical science in the early modern period, especially on the British Isles. Thus, the movement is known as British empiricism. With the benefit of more recent advances in the study of the mind, we can say that Locke went too far. We are not actually born as empty slates, but do in fact have some innate predispositions for learning languages, for example, but also many other things. I have already mentioned previously that there are things we think we know based on observations that are actually not part of the observation. This was noted by David Hume, who pointed out that we tend to have a strong belief in causation, one thing causing another, but we never actually observe causation itself. We only ever observe a constant conjunction of events. Billiard balls colliding and moving in expected manner is a classic example. We can watch them do so for as long as we like, but we will never be able to see causation itself. Only the balls rolling on the table, hitting each other, and so on. If all our knowledge is based on experiences, then why do we believe in the existence of causality? Can we even be sure that it does exist? Just because we can have numerous repeated cases of balls behaving in certain ways, we cannot use inductive logic to infer that the balls will keep on behaving that way in the future as well. Hume pointed out that induction itself cannot be justified by empirical observation. We only have experience of the past, not the future, and we have never observed any mysterious force of induction any more than causality. Things may not continue to behave in the future the same way they have behaved so far. In the past, when you have jumped up, you have also fallen back down. But perhaps the next time you try it, you will float up into space. We are merely used to having things occur in certain ways, and belief in causality and induction are just caused by the force of habit. Even some observations go against empiricism, ironically. We can observe some seemingly strange things, such as the apparent bending of a stick as we push it partially below water. Yet we don't believe that the stick actually suddenly bends. Apparently, we don't form the belief that sticks bend in water, but that means we don't form our beliefs and thus gain knowledge only from our experiences and observations. The hugely influential German philosopher Immanuel Kant realized that both rationalism and empiricism seem to be getting something right, but neither is good enough alone. He wanted to create a synthesis of them to get the best of both worlds. He figured that while we do get information through observation, our minds are actively participating in those observations. He saw reason as the thing that organizes our observations into meaningful categories, even ordering them in time and space and in causal relations. In a way, our minds see the world through schemas with which we can make sense of the world. The term schema is still used by psychologists, by the way. Some things we can know without observing them. This Kant called a priori knowledge before experience. That includes at least analytic knowledge, which is based on what concepts mean. A bachelorette is an unmarried woman, So if you hear that someone is a bachelorette, you already know 2 things about her. You can also do arithmetic without any observations, just by understanding the concepts you use, such as numbers and multiplication. Knowledge based on observations can't be called a posteriori. An observation, such as that the sun is shining outside right now, does not depend on any concepts. But we can glean synthetic knowledge based on observations. I could perhaps understand that since the sun is shining, it will be warm outside. Kant may have been mistaken about some details, thinking that the mental schemas are the same for all and immutable. But he seems to have gotten the main thing right. It is clear that our minds influence our observations. We can be primed to pay attention to some sort of things, for example. We can also be tricked into thinking we observe something we do not in fact observe. The categories we know, such as types of objects, like airplane, book, bicycle, or cell phone, or of their qualities, such as color, smell, texture, influence how we observe things. Importantly, we cannot really observe anything without applying our schemas. Our past experiences, what we have learned, remember, and can imagine, influence what we can and do in fact observe. We are active observers. There is no such thing as a passive observation. The reality an sich, as it really is, independent of ourselves, is out of reach in the sense that we cannot experience it as it is. It doesn't even help to create instruments to do the observing, because they have also been built to observe the things we want to observe. Even scientific observations are theory-laden. The observations themselves are influenced and or limited, and also often made possible by the theories used. For example, in the building of the instruments, and in analyzing the data gathered. Of course, the instruments can increase the breadth or scope of our observational capabilities, but the issue still remains in principle. One of the most important analytical philosophers of all time, Ludwig Wittgenstein, focused on the limitations to our thinking caused by the limitations of our language. We assume the structure of reality to be the same as the structure of language. Language is also actively used to create a social reality. There is no such thing as a bachelorette, independent of language, for example. In the mid-20th century, this realization came to be called the linguistic turn because it was such a big deal. This may seem ridiculously obvious to us, but even in recent years many people have proven incapable of distinguishing social reality and concepts from reality itself. The words man and woman refer to cultural concepts, and there is no reason to expect reality, independent of our language, to conform to our concepts. Language is used to create this dichotomy and this social reality. But objective reality is very different. It doesn't care about our concepts. But like I said, not all people can understand this even today. As with Cartesian skepticism, the realization of our limits of knowledge should not lead us to despair, but to accepting those limitations as part of the knowledge we do have, and to learning to cope with uncertainty. See you next time.